About 3 months ago, I was walking down the steps in the rectory, and I have a dog. She's 135 pounds and about this tall, and she sleeps 23 hours a day, and she naps the other hour, right? And I was thinking about something, but it wasn't walking down the stairs, and I stepped on it. And I fell down the stairs and blew out this knee. I had my 3rd surgery on it. And it's just in the last week that I can kneel and genuflect again. It's really nice to do, but my knee's a little out of practice, I don't mind telling you. Last night, I hope we got the idea that the answer to our fears about the world is Jesus acting through us. Us accepting the responsibility of letting God change us, primarily through prayer, and then letting that do the change that God needs, instead of us attempting to exert control and fix everything for God. Tonight, what I'd like to do is, first of all, tell you about tomorrow night. That tomorrow night, we'll be looking at pain and suffering in our life, because that's a big thing that can prevent us from living inside out. Is the pain and disappointments and struggles that we experience, so we'll look at that. I also wanted to let you know I hate self-promotion, but I got a book. So 20 Jesus points for anyone who buys it. It's an arbitrary system. There's a sign-up sheet back by the hall, and if you sign up, the parish is just going to order however many are needed and get them to you. It's a book where we take about 10 years of my column, the questions people have asked and the answers that I've given. If you go through there and find anything wrong, pray for me. Doing my best. So what I want to do tonight is just give us some principles for how we can live inside out, how we can, in a sense, maximize God's ability to work in and through us. These principles are based on something I've been writing for every year since I've been ordained. Every time I learned something that I felt was life-changing and important, I'd write it down, and I kept that book with me everywhere I go. I'm not going to give you all of them because we've only got, a couple more nights left, and I have a lot to learn. But what they're based on is a moment that happened at my ordination. It was the best day of my life, June 13th, 1998. I think there was an earthquake that day. That was awkward. One part of the ordination, we lay on the ground, face down, while they pray. And you can hear them calling the saints. The litany of saints is being prayed at that time. I was getting ordained with a guy named Jay, and we were in seminary for 6 years together. It was a 2-year program. But as we were laying there, I knew his favorite saint was Saint Teresa of Lisieux. And we were laying there, when they said her name, I kind of tapped his hand. And he knew my favorite was Saint Augustine, and when they said his name, he tapped my hand. And it's this incredible, divine moment when all of a sudden I realized they had just cleaned the carpet, I think the day before the ordination, and the smell of the carpet cleaner was pretty intense. And I'm laying there in this incredibly spiritual moment going, I'm going to be really sick. In the fumes. And I look over, and Jay's kind of turned his head to the side because he was like, I can't breathe. A memo went out shortly after for future ordinations. But afterward, Bishop Carl, I said to him, I think that's going to be the priesthood in many ways. These incredibly divine moments happening in the most human circumstances and situations. God's blessings and carpet cleaner all mixed up into one. That too much of my life I have divided. I've said good things, God, bad things, not God. Instead of seeing God's omnipresent, right? He's present in it all. The first idea that we have to remember is none of holiness is possible without the power of the Holy Spirit. And the good news is you've got it. You've got God's breath in you. You've got His Spirit in you. It makes us, in the words of the Apostle Paul, more than conquerors. There's no sin in our life that has a chance if we really apply the power that God has given us and the desire. So with that in mind, what are some principles that can help us live inside out? First of all, remember who you are. One of the things that I've learned working with different professionals like police and EMTs is that there's this scale that some of them use called alert and oriented scale. And if you read this scale, it says this, like you and I right now are alert and alert and oriented times 4. We know where we are, we know how we got here, we know what's going on. You might wonder why you came, but that's my fault. That has nothing to do with alert and oriented. But if you get hit in the head, the first thing you lose is recent events. That's called alert and oriented times 3. The scale works all the way down to alert and oriented times 0. And here's how that's described in the manual. The person who is alert and oriented times 0 has no idea who they are or how they got there. Their existence is limited to the knowledge that they exist and that they're in pain. And I'm struck by how many times I've bumped into people and prayed with people and talked to people who are basically at that level spiritually. All I know is I exist and I hurt. And in the midst of all of that is this reminder that God wants to give us about who we are. We'll start with 1 John chapter 3. The beautiful Apostle John, he's the last disciple alive at this point. He's on exile on a little island. And he's writing a letter to the Christians. And he writes this incredible line. See what love the Father has bestowed on us, in that we may be called children of God, yet that is what we are. Beloved, we are God's children now. What we shall be has not yet been revealed. But when it's revealed, we'll be like Him, because we'll see Him as He is. There's John in exile, alone, and he's sitting there thinking, how amazing is it that I'm God's son now? That's a reminder for all of us that there's no circumstance or situation in our lives that can trump the most important truth about us. We belong to God. We are God's children. What an incredible thing that is. Parents, what would you do for your kids? How much more than will perfect love do everything necessary to get us to heaven? We are God's kids right now. We're also salt and light. Remember that from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter, well, it just left my head, where Jesus says, you are salt of the earth. He doesn't say you can be. He doesn't say you should be. He says, you are salt of the earth. When God looks at you, He says, oh, you're salt for the earth. Salt in those days was used for 2 things. Preserving food, right? And for flavor. Our call is to preserve the goodness of the world, to combat evil, and to literally flavor people's lives, to make them better. We can do this, and we do, by just existing. That's how God built us. Our natural state is salt and light. Jesus says in there, but what if salt loses its taste? What is it good for? It's good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. They didn't have ice in Israel. I wrote a chemistry prof at MSU, where Jesus went to school. I said to him, how does salt lose its taste? Because I'd never heard of that. It struck me as a curious thing. And he wrote me this back. Father, salt has its taste. Salt holds its taste. It's a mineral. It stays that way forever. You can mix it with anything. You can eat it. In the end, you've still got salt taste. And then he wrote this. I recall eating sea rations in 1973 that were boxed in 1943. Each box contained a packet of salt, and 30 years later, it still tasted like salt. Basically, for salt to lose its salty taste, you have to introduce a chemical action to make it no longer salt. Isn't that something? For salt to lose its salty taste, it has to not be salt. You and I, God's kids, salt for the earth, this is our state. That's why we find happiness when we live holy lives. That's why when we fall into sin and go deeper and deeper in it, we hate it. Because we're not made for that. We're made to be salt for the earth, preserving the goodness, fighting evil, enhancing people's lives. In that we find joy. Remember who you are. You're God's kids. You're salt and you're light. Another principle is to give up control. Ouch. We love control when we have it. When other people do, it's not so good. But we have to learn that we can't be and aren't supposed to be in control of everything. We're supposed to be in control of one thing, and that's here. And if you're like me, that's fight enough, right? That's fight enough to just exercise self-control. I remember in high school, my mom at one point looked at me and said, "I can't believe what comes out of your mouth." I told her, if you knew what I didn't say, you would pin medals on me, right? There would be parades, you know. Self-control, good. Controlling others, not so good. And for a ton of reasons, not the least of which, if you practice controlling other people, you'll get good at it. And to get good at it, we've got to be manipulative, we've got to be angry. Those are things that are not defining of God's children. My buddy Bill coaches 5th grade girls basketball. I didn't know there was such a thing, right, until he said, "Hey, the girls want you to come and bless them before a game." So I went, and if you've gone to 5th grade girls basketball, it does shave time off purgatory. You sit there for an hour and a half, and it's 4-2. And you're like, really? You know, we're sitting there, it's the end of the game. I prayed with the girls, and it worked. They're winning, you know. And we get the rebound, and there's about 3 seconds left. And we're ahead by a point. And Bill calls a timeout. And all the little squeakers come to him, right? And he's a great coach. He's so good. And he gets right down there and says, "Okay, girls, we do not need a basket. Just got to hold on to it. We don't need a basket. Don't shoot," because that's what they like to do, right? So they put their little hands in the middle. He says, "Remember, we don't need a basket." True story. I saw this with my own eyes. They inbound the pass to little Annie, who it's not in her hands 0.7 seconds, and she launches this three-pointer, and it missed the rim, it missed the net, it missed the gym, right? And Bill keeps his composure. I'm back there screaming, you know, timeout, gets him together, and he's got this ears bleeding thing going on. We're keeping a smile. "Okay, girls," he says, "do you remember what I told you?" And Annie says to him, totally sincere, she said, "We don't need a basket." "Hey, but Annie, you shot." And she said, "That wasn't going in." That's the truth. It's going to be in Congress, you know. This is the thing with control. We don't know what we don't know. And often what's clear to us is not clear to other people. And if our answer to that is to scream more and to get more controlling, we'll find ourselves enslaved to every circumstance possible. We'll find ourselves emotionally enslaved to people we don't even like because of our incessant need to control. Take that energy and put it toward self-control. Mix a lot of prayer in there, and we're that much closer to being a saint. I was with my best friend in the world, Father Jeff Rhodes. We always say to this, we didn't grow up together, we got taller together. Neither of us had really grown up that much. He went into seminary 3 years after I did, so I'm a better priest. We're not at all competitive. He and I every year take a 1-week retreat together. And it's up north. And we stay at a friend's house. It's beautiful. And we're driving on 131. You know this road. We're closer to it than I usually am. You know it's 2 lanes? Mine, right? I'm driving, I've got Jeff with me, and there's a car in front of me, and they're going like 50. And I'm guiding, right? I try telling them, the speed limit's 55, right? No, it ain't happening, just knuckles and hair. That's all I can see. And we are going slow. And the more the miles tick away, the more irritated I get. And finally, Jeff says this line. He says, you know, I think your anger is actually making her go quicker. I told him he was stupid. You know, really the only intelligent response. We got talking, and he said, you're not mad because she's going slow. You're mad because you're not in control. And I sat there and I'm thinking about it, and here I am in northern Michigan. Trees, scenery, I'm with my best friend in the world. And I'm mad because we're going slow? That's nuts. The months leading up to this retreat, all I can think about is that week of quiet prayer with my best friend. Now we're there, and I'm mad because it's slow. That's crazy. I was mad because I wasn't in control. And that happens, I think, to a lot of us. We don't like to be boxed in. But our God let himself get boxed in, didn't he? And it worked out pretty good for us. When we give up control, we'll find that there's a lot of beautiful moments in our lives that we were just going to blast right by. We were just going to let them go because our obsession was, I need to be in charge of this. Instead of, God, you're in charge. Show me the way. There's a real freedom in this. Another principle I've got comes from my dad. We lived out in the sticks. And I don't know if people still do this. I've lived in the city for the last, I don't know how many years. But people would always drop off dogs and cats, right? They still do this? I see a lot of nodding. Okay. We wake up in the morning and there would be a pack of tiny little puppies on the porch or a bunch of kittens. And I knew the Lord put them there for us. My dad didn't understand. Right? I was a little St. Francis, you know, just sliding them bread, doing all this. And every time my dad caught me, he'd say this, son, if you feed it, it's going to stay on the porch. And, you know, he was right. We have a lot of dogs and cats. Sin, it's the same way. And I realized that when I was talking to a dad at Lansing Catholic, his son had gotten in trouble. It wasn't horrible, but it was enough where I had to call the kid in for what we call a come to Jesus session, right? I put on this face, and his dad came in later and was kind of mad that we punished him. And I'll never forget, he said this to me, Father, he's just a boy. He's got to get that out of the system. And I said, if you feed the dog, it stays on the porch. Right? If we feed sin in our lives, it'll get bigger. And that cute little puppy of sin that we've got and that we like and we nurture, it'll turn into a snarling beast. The evil one has no desire for you to be happy. And anything he offers will not bring happiness, even if it just seems so cute and cuddly at the beginning. It grows. It gets bigger. We got to stop feeding sin in our lives. We've got to declare war on sin in our lives. And I would love, by the way, to give you principles that I've mastered, but I don't have any of those. This is my fight too. This is all of our fight. If sin isn't tempting to you, you're doing it wrong. But what we try to remember in each temptation is God calling us to something greater. Calling us out of ourselves and into the kingdom of heaven by refusing to be enslaved to sin, by refusing to feed the dog of sin. It will find no home in our hearts. There's a great passage in Romans 13 where Paul says this, put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Make no provision for the desires of the flesh. No provision for the desires of the flesh. Lent is such a good time to declare war on sin in our lives. To recognize The thing that makes it a sin is that it hurts our souls, and God doesn't want that. It chains us when He wants us free, being salt and light, living as His kids now. We've got to recognize that the sins that we like are still sins, and they hurt us, and we've got to stop feeding them. We do that through the wonderful sacrament of reconciliation. I can't tell you how many times somebody has said to me, Father, I confess the same things every time. And I usually tell them, you do. No, I'm kidding. I never remember. I'm like, really? Of course we do. We've made little fortresses of sin in our heart. It's going to take time to knock those down. Well, we go in there to receive mercy and forgiveness and strength. And it might take 6 years or more of confessing a sin. But here's what we're going to do. We're never going to give up. All kidding aside, you know, MSU, the Spartans, I always point this out to people. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, that 2,300 years later we talk about, they lost. We don't remember they won. We remember they were faithful to the fight. And we've got to be faithful to the fight. Not judge success by our performance, but by how often we let God's mercy touch that sin in our life. God will win. God has won. We're just going to wear it down. We're going to go to reconciliation. We're going to receive forgiveness. That is us making no provision for the flesh. That's us not feeding the dog. One of the easiest things for us to forget is that we've got an enemy. We've got a genuine enemy. The evil one